That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
I always get a ton of questions asking, Mason, can we go over some waiver wire options? Can I just go to the waiver wire and try to pick up some players for free that could potentially help my team? But there's an issue with this, and the issue is everybody's playing in a different league format. I mean, we have some people out here watching this channel that, are playing in 10-team leagues where you're only rostering 19 players. Now, I will say, if that's your dynasty format, first off, fix your life, fix your league. I promise you, you are going to have so much more fun when you're able to roster 30 plus players consistently. And another issue with this is there are some people that play in 16-team dynasty leagues where you do roster those 30 players. So obviously the options on the waiver wire are going to be dramatically different from league to league. But what I've decided to do, how I think we've been able to fix this issue, is I'm just pulling up one of our most recent Dynasty startup drafts. This is the Dynasty startup that I believe we completed last week. And what I'm going to do is go to round 27. We're starting off in round 27. Any player drafted before then, we are going to assume was already on a Dynasty roster in the league that you're playing in. Now, you know that there are usually a couple other marks that we like to go to. Usually we like to check out Keep Trade Cut to see where those players have their own ADP. But the issue with Keep Trade Cut is it only goes so deep until it just gets a little bit wacky, where that's not necessarily going to be able to help us a ton either. So I think we are just at the point where we're most likely going to have to ignore Keep Trade Cut. Underdog Fantasy as well. Y'all know I love using Underdog because they have real money drafts with everybody over 18 years old, and their ADP set is usually fantastic, but hell, they only go 20 rounds. It's redraft. So a lot of these guys aren't being drafted over there either. I think none of these guys are going to be drafted over there. Now, of course, if you want to go spend your 20th round pick on someone like Jalen Darden that we'll get at the end of the video on Underdog Fantasy, go sign up, promo code FLOCK. Have a ton of fun drafting teams. When you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they'll match a first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. On top of this, you'll get our Dynasty rankings, rookie rankings, Dynasty research book. Get into drafts with us on the live stream. Get into drafts in the public lobby. Underdog Fantasy, link in the description. Promo code FLOCK. But I think we will have to ignore them as well. But let's go through. Let's just dive into this. And let's lead it off with the player that went highest in the startup draft. I still think there's a pretty good chance he's on your waiver wire, though. Hunter Long. Now, I know some people are going to hear that name, and obviously it will bring up some memories of last year because Hunter Long was a rookie last offseason. I mean, going back to what we've covered in our Dynasty research book, identifying the fact that these rookie tight ends have lower hit rates than other positions. They very, very rarely ever gain value. And if they do, it's not like they're jumping up to be an elite asset by the time they get to their third season, unless your name's Kyle Pitts. But nonetheless, Hunter Long was in that draft class. And with Hunter Long, I honestly thought that this is a player that once he got carted off the field during the preseason, I was like, okay, well, I guess his rookie year is just over. I guess we don't need to talk about Hunter Long until next offseason. But he was actually able to come back from that injury. It wasn't nearly as severe as what pretty much everybody assumed it was. We all thought that he was out for the season, but he might as well have been out for the year because Hunter Long did absolutely nothing his rookie year. He played in 7 games. Okay, so obviously 7 games, not necessarily like he's getting a ton of playing time. But with those 7 games as well, Hunter Long had a total of 3 targets. Yes, 3 targets in 7 games. So he's averaging less than a target a game. But because he was that rookie tight end, we should not be focusing in on his rookie season. He was playing behind Gesicki. Gesicki stayed healthy the entire year. He didn't really have a chance at all to get on the field. And I'll say, Hunter Long's not doing anything this upcoming season either, especially with the wide receivers that the Miami Dolphins have here and the fact they bring back Mike Gesicki. But we need to remember something with Mike Gesicki. The current coaching staff in Miami was not the team that drafted Gesicki. We have seen this time and time again, that when a new coaching staff comes in, when the entire front office pretty much just switches out, those players that initially had that investment, they are less willing to sign them to that second contract. Now, of course, they give Mike Gesicki the franchise tag as they should, if they're going to be willing to dish out that money to Tyreek Hill, they're going to be willing to trade their draft picks and go all in to see what Tua Tagovailoa is this year. They give Gesicki the franchise tag, so he will be here. Mike Gesicki will be the tight end 1 this year, and Hunter Long is not going to be someone that you can put into your starting lineup. But is that what we need for him to be an intriguing waiver wire pickup? No, the bar to get on a dynasty roster, if you were playing in a deep league, is very low. But what we need to look at is going to be his prospect profile. And with Hunter Long, he does check a lot of boxes. People are going to be surprised, but he was drafted inside the top 100 draft picks last year. He was drafted with the 17th pick in the 3rd round. It's probably higher than where Jalen Weidemeyer is going to go. It's probably higher than where Isaiah Likely is going to go. Some other players that you are going to have to spend a 3rd round pick on in your rookie draft this season. Or you can pick up Hunter Long for free because he has some other intriguing marks on his profile. He ran a 4.51 40-yard dash, which we have proven in our Dynasty rookie draft guide that the 40-yard dash does matter for the tight end position. And on top of this, he weighs 254 pounds. The craziest thing, out of all the rookie research that we have done diving into draft classes since 2014, every single one, the craziest thing ever is 254 pounds is pretty much what every single tight end that's successful weighs. Every single tight end is 251, 252, 253, 254, somewhere in that range. He has the prototypical size that you're going to see from the position. He declared early out of Boston College as well. So you would assume he declares early. Maybe he didn't necessarily have the usage in the receiving game, but no, I mean, he was able to get on the field at Boston College and carved himself out a nice role. Now, of course, we're going to expect his market share numbers to naturally be lower for a tight end than you would assume with the wide receiver, but he had 22% of the team's passing yards on a per game basis at Boston College's final year there. So we're looking at Hunter Long. He's probably a top 3 tight end in this draft class if he was here. Yet the difference is, instead of having to take him in the 3rd round, you're just getting him off the waiver wire for free. Now, like I said, yes, I will acknowledge, bad situation this year. There's way too much target competition in Miami for Hunter Long to do anything. But if this coaching staff does not sign Mike Gesicki to that 2nd deal next offseason, Hunter Long could all of a sudden be a starting tight end in Miami going into year 3, which is when you expect these tight ends to break out. And on top of that, he did have an intriguing prospect profile once you look at that capital. Now, let's go over to our next option. It's going to be a big-bodied wide receiver, I will say. Usually, people overvalue these big-bodied wide receivers. Usually, you see the size, and all of a sudden, people try to talk themselves into, oh my God, this guy's a prototypical Alpha X wide receiver. He has so much upside. Just think about the upside Courtland Sutton has, even though he's never been anything more than a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. I mean, that's what people think. But Auden Tate currently is free. And with Auden Tate, you could make the argument that he may just be the wide receiver 1 in Atlanta. Now, I would probably say Olamide Zaccheaus ahead of Auden Tate based on the fact that, Olamide Zaccheaus knows the system. It's been there for a while, but hell, Marcus Mariota is the quarterback this upcoming season. And I will acknowledge, yes, this is a team that could easily go wide receiver round 1. This is a team that could also go quarterback round 1, potentially have a better option than Marcus Mariota coming into the year. But with Auden Tate, we have to remember, he flashed. He is only 25 years old. And with Auden Tate, in his 2nd season, in 2019, for Cincinnati, he came out and had 47.9 receiving yards per game, which I know that's not necessarily jaw-dropping. I understand that's not necessarily the best mark we've ever seen, but we have to look at the context of that team. Remember, 2019, the Cincinnati Bengals, they were the worst team in the NFL. They got Joe Burrow with the 1st overall pick in 2020 for a reason. This offense was atrocious. So if we look at the percentage of the offense that you had Auden Tate accounting for, in the NFL as a 2nd-year player, very rarely does this happen. But Auden Tate had almost 21% of his team's passing offense on a per game basis, and there were quality wide receivers there. You have someone like Tyler Boyd. Auden Tate's obviously not going to outproduce Tyler Boyd his 2nd year. Tyler Boyd's a much better receiver, but Tyler Boyd's not on your waiver wire. And also, he has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins ahead of him. Now, of course, that was back in 2019. So we've had 2 seasons of very disappointing years for Auden Tate. In 2020, we have to remember this is a team that went out there and added T. Higgins. T. Higgins is a better wide receiver than Auden Tate. That should not surprise anybody, but T. Higgins is not on the waiver wire, okay? So he was not able to get on the field with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd there. T. Higgins is pretty much just, you take Auden Tate and you make him better in every way imaginable. But also, Auden Tate that year had 2 significant shoulder injuries, which shut him down for the end of the season as well. And then in 2021, they added Jamar Chase, okay? So when you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd there, even if you exclusively run 3 wide receiver sets, you're still never getting on the field in Cincinnati if you're Auden Tate in that scenario. So he's going over to an offense that we're not excited about. Of course, Kyle Pitts is going to lead this team with targets. Cordell Patterson, whether he's playing running back, a hybrid, a wide receiver, I don't care. Cordell Patterson will most likely be the second option on this team in targets. But then right after that, you could see it be Auden Tate. Now, of course, there are some massive concerns. Like we've already discussed, quarterback situation, gross. Also, this is a team that can easily go out there and draft a wide receiver in the NFL draft. Hell, if that happens, who cares? Send Auden Tate right back down to the waiver wire. And on top of this, with Auden Tate, they are paying him absolutely nothing. He's getting paid like $1.1 million, which of course, hell, if someone wants to pay me that, sign me up. But Auden Tate is a professional NFL wide receiver, and if you're going to have a large role, we assume that you're going to have a contract that is much larger than that. But let me go back to the depth chart. You got Auden Tate, Damiere Byrd, Olamide Zaccheaus, Chad Hansen, Frank Darby on that team. This is easily a depth chart you could become the wide receiver 1 in, no problem. Now, our next wide receiver is going to be an option that I will admit I am very biased with. I actually heavily root for this player. I don't have him on that many teams, but I've met him in person. I've seen him on the University of Texas campus multiple times. I used to go to the rec very often to play racquetball. Hell, he was there pretty much every time I went. Devin Duvernay. Here with Devin Duvernay. He's great at the University of Texas. A great football player. He was drafted in the 3rd round in 2019. And since then, he has not done much. Now, of course, we have to go through and look at the context of this situation. You have someone like Hollywood Brown, you have Mark Andrews, you had Sammy Watkins, you have Willie Snead clogging the depth chart where Devin Duvernay was not able to get on the field in year 1. And in year 2, you have Hollywood Brown, you have Mark Andrews just dominating. You have Rashad Bateman and Sammy Watkins. Now, a couple of those wide receivers did deal with injuries, but still, crowded depth chart year 2 for Devin Duvernay. I think that we can almost look at it and say, well, maybe there's a reason he didn't produce, but now you are living in a world where Sammy Watkins is playing for the Green Bay Packers. And trust me, I am rooting for my guy in Sammy Watkins. And Devin Duvernay is one of the safest wide receivers that you can have on Baltimore if you were going to try to take a shot on a wide receiver 3 here, because as we've discussed, he has the team investment. He was selected in the 3rd round by the Baltimore Ravens in 2020. On top of this, with Devin Duvernay, he is critical to what they are actually doing in the returning game. He is a special teams stud. So that's not necessarily going to score fantasy football points, but it is going to make sure that Devin Duvernay is on this Baltimore Ravens roster. And what we need to look for is Devin Duvernay if we do get an injury to either Rashad Bateman or to Hollywood Brown, because Devin Duvernay ran like a 4.39 40-yard dash. And at Texas, what's surprising is he wasn't necessarily used as a deep threat wide receiver. He was used a lot closer to the line of scrimmage. He had probably one of the best set of hands in college football, operating a little more out of the slot. And for this reason, I think you could actually see Devin Duvernay be the fill-in for either Rashad Bateman or Hollywood Brown in the case of an injury. Both wide receivers have dealt with injuries in recent past. He's still 24 years old. I'm willing to take a shot on Devin Duvernay, but I am very biased. I'll be the first person to admit that. Now our next wide receiver went to Texas, not the University of Texas, but instead North Texas. It's going to be Jalen Darden. And this is a wide receiver that was in that 2021 draft class. He is a metrics darling. He broke out as a sophomore. And what you will not believe, you will not believe his senior season. 132 receiving yards a game, which is about 46.7% of his team's passing offense on a per game basis. I know you'll believe that, especially at North Texas. I mean, you have guys like Christian Watson, Jahan Dotson. I mean, you have a couple players that were getting that mark in this year's draft class. But what nobody is getting to is how he just dominated in scoring touchdowns. His market share number with his yards per game would have been significantly higher if it wasn't for the fact that once you score that touchdown, you can't rack up any more yards, because he averaged over 2 touchdowns a game, 2.11 touchdowns a game at North Texas. That was over 75% of the passing touchdowns. So out of every 4 touchdowns that North Texas had through the air, 3 of them went to Jalen Darden. That's crazy. Now, I will say, it's a very tough depth chart. Obviously, you have no Antonio Brown, which that is going to be nice to see. But you do have Chris Godwin. You have Mike Evans. You have Russell Gage as well. Russell Gage, 100% way better than Jalen Darden. I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying Jalen Darden's going to be the wide receiver 3 in Tampa. It will be Russell Gage. The issue is Russell Gage isn't on your waiver wire. And we're talking about deep ads here. You also have guys like Tyler Johnson, Brashad Perriman, Cyril Grayson. But I think Darden, outside of possibly Tyler Johnson, you can actually fit him in as well. I think you have possibly slightly more intrigue in Jalen Darden, because I know a lot of people can actually go through and put him on their taxi squads. If you can roster first and second year players on your taxi squad, that's going to be ideal for Darden. If you want to pick up Tyler Johnson, that's fine. I think that they're very similar. Both players looked great with their metrics coming out of school on this very depth chart. But if anything were to happen to one of these wide receivers above, we know this team is going to be one of the most pass-happy offenses in the entire NFL. And with Chris Godwin, we need to remember when he suffered that injury. And if we look at a 9-month timetable for Godwin, he's going to miss training camp. And there's a small chance that Godwin misses the beginning of the season as well. So if that happens and somehow Darden can just make his way on the field, and then all of a sudden, say 2 weeks in, he's racked up 12 receptions, 2 receiving touchdowns, and 160 receiving yards, possibly you can use him and flip him and a 3rd round pick to get a future 2nd. Now, if you get that player from the waiver wire, that could be very intriguing. If Godwin was not currently injured, I think it would be less appealing. But speaking of guys that you really need to go out there and pick up if you can roster 2nd-year players on your taxi squad, we're going to go over to Dez Fitzpatrick. Dez Fitzpatrick was drafted with the 4th pick in the 4th round last year. So he doesn't really have the same level of draft capital that we're talking about with someone like Devin Duvernay. But what you do have is a very limited depth chart. I mean, it's very similar where you had Robert Woods, obviously with the injury at the end of the season last year, which is going to possibly open up the window for the beginning part of the season for someone like Dez Fitzpatrick. And here you have A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, obviously that core asset. But outside of that, who else is going to fill in that hole for Robert Woods if he does start slow? Because remember, Robert Woods is close to 30. The Rams gave away Robert Woods for nothing because they wanted to cut him. We said they couldn't cut him because of the dead money on the contract. They said, hell, we'll trade him for nothing. That ended up happening. So if Robert Woods does have that injury linger at the beginning part of the season, I would imagine that Dez Fitzpatrick is actually probably the favorite over Nick Westbrook-Ikhine to slide in that role, despite Nick Westbrook-Ikhine showing flashes last year. But I think that should be it for this video. Of course, please let me know your thoughts. Please go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already, and I really hope that you have a great day.